Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Tanya Craft Perry, and I am the 33rd District Director of Education. Welcome to another session of our Connecting Communities speaker series. October is Learning Disability, Dyslexia, and ADHD Awareness Month. So this evening's webinar is rather fitting. It is a panel discussion that focuses on advocating for and supporting special education students and their families from the perspectives of teachers, parent advocates, and community-based organizations. We are so glad that you have joined us for this informative and inspiring hour of discussion. We want to share a few logistics about this Zoom meeting before we start. This is a Zoom webinar, which means that our panelists will be the only people you can see and hear during this event. Our participants will have neither access to the video nor sound for the duration of the session. So please feel free to sit back and relax. The questions we received through your registration for this webinar have been given to our panelists in advance to answer. Please ask any additional questions in the Q&A section, and the panelists will do their best to address them during the webinar, either in the Q&A section or live. And as you heard, this session is being recorded. Now, we have 6 panelists for tonight, and I will now turn the floor over to them to introduce themselves, and then we will begin our discussion. Daryl?
Hi, it's great to be here with you. My name is Daryl McKillian, and I am the Director of Metropolitan Ministries at Joni and Friends.
Marci Peoples and Christine Jackson.
So good evening, everyone. I am Marci Peoples. I come to you from Los Angeles County Office of Education in the Special Education Unit, and I'm excited to be here with you tonight.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Jackson. I'm a coordinator with the Los Angeles County Office of Education, and I'm looking forward to our time together tonight.
And Nicole Eredics.
Hello. Hi there. My name is Nicole Eredics, and I am a teacher and an inclusive education consultant. And I work all over the country, actually, doing consulting work.
Kendra,
and it's a pleasure
Hatchett.
to be here.
Oh, Kendra Hatchett.
Hi, I'm Kendra. Hi, I'm Kendra Hatchett. I'm a general education teacher and also a parent of a child in special ed, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
And last but not least, I'm Wray. I am also an officer with the 33rd District PTA. I'm the Director of Health. I'm an advocate for special education, basically because I have 2 kids that have been in special education for more than a decade. So I'm very familiar with the system, and I am here to share my story with you. Thank you.
Okay, so if we can see the slide with the layers of inclusion. And that will give everyone an idea of what our flow will be for this evening with our discussion. Okay, fantastic. So we will be beginning our conversation from the perspective of a community-based organization, specifically Joni and Friends. So I now turn you into the hands of Daryl.
Thank you so much, Tanya. I'd love to, my responsibility tonight is kind of represent the community and the role that the community plays in creating environments of inclusion. So I wanted to share my slides with you and just talk through the way we tend to want to approach this particular issue. I'm going to share my screen and then we'll get started here. Yeah, so as a representative of the faith-based aspect of community, one of the things we always like to ask, and one of the things that we help families and organizations who are coming into this space of inclusion, one of the things we always like to ask is, what is disability? What is special needs? How did we get here? And so there are three basic models as to how we got here. One of them, if you come from a faith-based community, is kind of this moral model where some people believe that they've come into the space of disability and special needs because they've sinned somehow, or they've done something wrong, that disability or special needs has entered their life. We hear that in all around the world where we travel globally. It doesn't matter where we are in the world, these ideas and social constructs and beliefs are real in the hearts and minds of people, and trying to get them to move away from this model is extremely difficult in a lot of cultures around the world. Even if they can be convinced, oftentimes those constructs run deep in the hearts and minds of people. People believe that they actually have the ability through some vice or through some dysfunction in their life to warrant disability or special needs, as if it's some sort of punishment. That's kind of the moral model. We want to dispense with that because it is not founded anywhere. The other model that we ascribe to oftentimes is the medical model. And what we say in the medical model is that if a person has an impairment, then there's something wrong with them. And so what we want to do is use medicine and technology and innovations and ingenuity to improve impairments. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. What's wrong with the medical model is that our motivation for improving and enhancing the lives of people with special needs or disability, our motivation is so that they can live as normal a life as possible. And one of the things we've had to ask is, and that disability research has had to ask, is what is normal, and does normal exist? We think that normal is a straw man. It is a red herring. It is a Trojan horse. None of us are normal. And so what happens is that when someone who has special needs goes in for a surgical procedure or something like that, and our goal is to make them normal, and that procedure is unsuccessful, what we've said to that person is that your procedure was unsuccessful, so you can never be normal. And that destroys people. Furthermore, I love that that there's a third option here, which is the social model. And Michael Oliver, the British disability reformer, has stated in the record that disability is a social state and not a medical condition. Oftentimes we hear from people, they say to us, as we go through the four corners of the world, serving the disability and special needs community, people say to us, there's nothing at all wrong with me. The entire problem is with society. So is special needs, is it a personal condition or is an impairment a personal condition, or is it a societal construct? You know, Dr. Oliver would argue it's a social construct. And he goes as far as saying that in this next slide. He says that here, individuals with disabilities will often state that the most difficult part of having a disability is not the disability itself, but the manner in which you're treated if you have a disability. So Oliver concludes, he says, in our view, it is society which disables physically impaired people. Disability is something imposed on top of our impairments by the way we are unnecessarily isolated and excluded from full participation in society. So in other words, he would argue that people have impairments, but disability comes from the way society treats people with impairments. So disability belongs to the community, impairments belong to the person. Let me wrap this up with just some simple takeaways. The first one is that the moral model doesn't exist and is irrelevant, and we need to dispense with it. The medical model is great, but our motivation has to be that we're enhancing and improving lives without fixing people or attempting to make them normal, because normal doesn't exist. All of us have disabilities, all of us have impairments, and none of us are normal. Thirdly, the social model blended with the medical model is great, because in that model, we need to deconstruct the attitudes and barriers of belonging, equity, and inclusion that are rooted in society. And then we need to construct authentic community. Discrimination, marginalization, disenfranchisement is still prevalent in the special needs and disability community. So we need to advocate, and we need to take a fresh look at our communities and our structures to identify where are the barriers to belonging, to inclusion, and to equity, and for people being able to authentically belong to community. What does that look like, and how do we deconstruct those institutions to do that? Because as a Christian organization, we believe that every human being is made in the likeness of God, and that we are all endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights and virtues, right? And so that doesn't discriminate against, gender or ethnicity or social class or ability level. And so we need to, as a full community, we need to figure out where the barriers, and then we need to deconstruct those as community, so that those with special needs and disabilities can fully belong to community without discrimination and without being disenfranchised in any way. Thanks so much for allowing me to share. I'd love to field any questions you might have at the end.
Okay, thank you, Daryl. We'll now move into our district/school layer of inclusion with Marci Peoples and Christine Jackson.
Well, what a great introduction. Thank you. And wow, powerful words already from our panelists. This is going to be great over the course of this next hour. So I'm Chris Jackson, and I just want to reintroduce myself and say hello. We'll be sharing the district and school perspective as part of our panel here. Marci Peoples will be joining us.
So welcome, everyone. We're excited to be here. So again, like we said, welcome everyone. Chris and I are very excited to be here with you tonight. My name, as you already know, is Marci Peoples, and I, along with Chris Jackson, are going to present to you on inclusion from a school district site perspective. Chris and I work for Los Angeles County Office of Education, as I shared earlier, in the special education unit. Between Chris and I, we have more than 45 years experience in California education. We began as paraprofessionals, we moved into education specialists, inclusion specialists, teachers on special assignment, program specialists, and coordinators. We both hold our education specialist teaching credentials, master's degree in special ed and human development. And between the two of us, we have sat in more than 10,000 IEPs where every I is dotted and T is crossed, making sure the IEP provides for education benefit. Chris and I approach education with the boots on the ground mentality, educating students. On the next several slides, Chris and I are going to share with you briefly some IEP tips to help you set yourself up for success and discussing inclusion with your district.
So we'll talk with you about the definition of inclusion and IDEA, what it means to you and your child, and some 8 quick IEP prep tips and what inclusion might mean to you.
Inclusion is defined by the Office of Special Education Programs as 80% or more of the day in a regular class. The law says that to the maximum extent appropriate based on the IEP needs of the child, Children with disabilities shall be educated in their neighborhood schools and attend regular classes. These regular classes are supported with supplemental aids and services necessary for their success. In an inclusive classroom, general education teachers as well as special education teachers work together to meet the needs of students. All of us here presenting to you tonight believes it takes everyone involved in a child's life for inclusion to happen. It starts first with you as the parent. Then it moves into support from your child's classroom setting, then support from the district or school site to believe in and support inclusivity. And then it is followed up by the support we receive in our communities, which we heard from Daryl on. These are our layers that make inclusion possible.
So I'm going to share with you a little bit about IDEA. IDEA is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and it's the nation's special education law. It's the most important law for children with disabilities, and it's the nation's special education law. So we are guided in these principles. It gives rights and it gives a whole lot of protections to children with disabilities, and it covers them from birth through the age of 21 and 11 months and 364 days. So all the way up until that birthday, whichever comes first. And parents and legal guardians also have rights under these laws. But when we're looking at the inclusion requirement, IDEA further supports equal education opportunities for children with disabilities, and it requires that our schools support inclusion of children with disabilities through the least restrictive environment. And it further emphasizes the involvement of families at every step of the special education process. So that's why Marcie and I are sharing with you some tips to take you through that IEP process when you're focused in the area of inclusion.
So Chris just went over IDEA, but I want to highlight that the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act strongly emphasizes the involvement of families at every step of the special education process. So that's starting with making a referral for evaluation to the development of the Individualized Education Plan or IEP and monitoring a child's progress. But to participate fully and confidently in the IEP meeting, you, the parents, must be educated about that process. Be familiar with all the key players and in possession of all the information needed to make knowledgeable decisions about your child. On the next several slides, Chris and I have put together our thoughts on tips that can assist you in the IEP process that will help in advocating towards an inclusive education for your child.
So our first IEP tip is consider your child's feelings when thinking about or talking with them about inclusion. Ask your child how they would feel about being included with their non-disabled peers. Is it something they would like, something they would enjoy, something they want to be part of? It can have a really powerful effect on the IEP team when they know the child's thoughts and feelings in addition to your own. Maybe even consider having your child attend the IEP meeting. Just having your child at the IEP meeting is really powerful. But you as the parent, as the guardian, it's up to you to make that choice about whether or not you would like to have them there with you at the IEP. Sometimes parents are surprised when they hear their children speak about their disability, especially during the IEP process, and it can be profoundly impacting on the IEP team, especially as they get a little bit older and they begin to develop the self-advocacy skills that are involved in that. So depending on your child's age and ability, the role that he or she can play as an IEP team member can really broaden the experience for everybody on that team. All right, let's go to tip number 2.
So IEP tip number 2. Imagine for a moment that your child's IEP focused as much on their strengths as it does on their deficits. How would that change your child's educational learning? Traditionally speaking, not much time is given to your child's strengths like it is for their deficits. But why really is this? All too often, it is believed that having a deficit supports the need for the IEP goals. However, good thing, Chris and I, working for the county and supporting districts, are seeing more and more schools shift the focus from a deficit outlook to a strengths-based outlook. Having an IEP meeting that focuses on both the strengths, interests, and preferences of your child is key. The entire IEP team, including you as the parent, gives input into what are those strengths. Having those strengths documented helps leverage how IEP goals are developed. IEP goals are developed with strengths that address the weaknesses. So what does this mean? It means that the IEP team looks at what your child can do, what the team wants them to do next, and how their strengths might be used to set goals to help address a particular need. So writing down your students' strengths, what they are interested in, and what they enjoy helps to create an IEP that meets your child's needs.
I have a quick one. Make a list of all those questions you want to make sure that you ask before you enter the IEP. You can even jot them down in your phone in the notes section if that's easier for you. Write them down on your computer, jot them down on a piece of paper with a pencil. It's going to help ensure that you discuss everything that's on your mind when you go into that IEP. Some things you may want to consider asking are, how do you know my child? How often do you work with my child? How are these IEP goals being monitored? How are you collecting data on these IEP goals? And then what kind of strategies are you going to be using to implement these goals? Are those strategies, are they research-based? What about those evidence-based practices? So just a few IEP questions you may want to throw out there to your child's IEP team.
IEP tip number 4. There are many different ways you can get to know your child's teacher and your child's teacher to get to know you. One approach could be to reach out to the new teacher or teachers at the end of an academic year to do a meet and greet. This meet and greet is your opportunity to share information about your child and begin developing that working relationship. Another approach you could take is wait until the new year has started and then call or make an appointment with your child's teacher or teachers to share with them about your child. Again, the goal is to build a working relationship with your child's teachers so everyone is on the same page with your child's IEP, their strengths, interests, and preferences.
I always think it's a great idea to visit your child's classroom. Take some time before the IEP, a number of times during the school year if you have the opportunity and your school site's open. That's key, I guess, in times like we've been having, to observe your child in their classroom, on the playground, if they're at school eating lunch, in the cafeteria or cafetorium. Observe them going from the classroom to the restroom space. Watch how they move throughout this space. It's a great opportunity for you to see how your child interacts with those around them, how they're navigating that school space, And also, you can observe what's really going on with your child in all those different settings that they're in the school. So I like tip number 5. I think it gives you an opportunity to kind of just take it all in.
So IEP tip 6. Organization of your child's school or IEP records can over time feel overwhelming. Chris and I have met many parents in our journey who have shared they could wallpaper their entire house with all the paper they have. So organizing all your records is a key strategy that can help when having meetings about your child. It allows you to refer to documents quickly when needed. Chris and I suggest putting records in a 3-ring binder arranged either chronologically or by section, so like evaluations, IEPs, report cards. But you need to find which organizational structure would work best for you, making it easy for you to retrieve documents you need.
We're almost through all these tips. For tip number 7, I would say request the records if you can't find yours for whatever reason. You have a right to your child's records. And the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, also known as FERPA, lots of acronyms in special ed, it's a federal statute. And the purpose of FERPA, it's twofold: to ensure that you have access to your children's educational records and to protect the privacy rights of parents and children by limiting access to these records without parental consent. So if you're preparing for a meet and greet with your child's teacher, part of their IEP team, maybe you're having an amendment and you just can't find that one bit of an amendment or previous IEP or an assessment that was done a while back, put in a records request in writing to the school and ask them to locate that for you. They'll do it for you.
Okay, IEP tip number 8. As we discussed a little bit earlier, placement for your child in the least restrictive environment. As an IEP team member, it is important that all placement options be discussed. Chris and I encourage you not to be afraid to discuss with the IEP team what placement in a general education classroom would look like for your child. The law says that to the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities shall be educated, 1, in their neighborhood schools, and 2, attend regular classes with any needed supplemental aids and services necessary for their success. There is ample research to show that inclusion is good for all kids with and without disabilities. So here is just a quick little snippet to show you what the continuum of placement options are. The purple in the upside down triangle is the least restrictive setting, and it moves down in the tiers down to the very, very dark red at the very bottom for the most restrictive educational setting.
So what does inclusion mean to you? The benefits of inclusion are numerous, not only for our children with special needs and their families, but for all children. And children involved in the right inclusive setting, they learn acceptance of other kids, of other children that might be a little bit different than they are, that might learn in a way that's different in the way that they learn. Kids learn from each other. And bottom line, with inclusion in the right setting, children with special needs have opportunities to participate in the same types of programs and activities as children without special needs. I'm just going to throw in a few of the benefits. Benefits for inclusion for all students with or without disabilities. They learn how to make friends. They learn how to problem solve. They learn social skills, how to build those important friendships. They learn a positive self-image. And another thing that was shared with me through Easter seals is that inclusion has a trickle-down effect, not just on the children that are part of inclusion, but on their families. So for all of us, inclusion benefits everyone. So thank you guys for listening to Marcie and I share, and we're going to turn it over now to Nicole.
Okay, so
Thank you so much, Marcie and Christine, for sharing all that information on inclusion. And I'm going to be talking about inclusion at the classroom level. So I am just going to pull up my screen here and share with you. And sorry. Okay. So my name is Nicole Eredics, and I've been in the field of education for almost 30 years. For the first half of my career, I was a inclusive education teacher. So I was actually a general education teacher working in a fully inclusive school system. And then most recently, I have been working as a board certified inclusion specialist, consulting to organizations and districts across the US and into Canada, helping build school and teacher capacity for including students. I'm also an author, and I run a blog called The Inclusive Class. So just to reiterate, one of the mandates of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is that the education of children with disabilities can be made more effective by having high expectations for such children and ensuring their access to the general education curriculum to the maximum extent possible. However, for some students, making the existing curriculum accessible is not an educationally appropriate goal. Those students will require a modified version of the curriculum. Research shows, however, that when educators do not know how to adapt academic content or modify curriculum, more restrictive educational placements might result due to incorrect assumption that students must be placed in a special education classroom to receive the specialized services from which they can benefit. So as I mentioned earlier, it's my goal to help build capacities in school and organizations for teachers in terms of creating modified curriculum and educational experiences. I often liken the process of inclusion as not just being invited into the classroom or not just being invited to have a seat at the table, but it's also participating as well. And research also shows that curriculum modifications are absolutely critical if students with disabilities are to achieve access to and make progress in the general education curriculum. So what I want to do now is take a few moments to show you how curriculum can be modified for example, if you have a situation where you can share this information with your classroom teacher or present it to your IEP team and let them know that making modifications is something that is not an onerous activity. It's just knowing the process. There are many resources out there that I'll share with you after this, and letting them know that inclusion can, and it does happen in many schools across the country and around the world. So just to reiterate, modifications help make curriculum achievable. They are for students who are working at a different grade level than their same age peers. They are substitutions, deletions, and additions to the curriculum. They change the curriculum, but they do not change the subject or the topic, which is why a student can remain in their general education classroom without having to leave for certain curriculum areas, such as language arts and math. What the teacher does is he or she looks at the overall topic or content of the curriculum, asks themselves, can this child participate in the curriculum with the goals that their same age peers have? If that's not the case, then how can I support their access and achievement in the curriculum? Once that is determined that the modifications are going to be made, there are 4 different ways in which a teacher can modify schoolwork. And those 4 different ways can happen individually or they can happen together. So I'm going to quickly go through those and share with you different ways of modifying curriculum. And in these examples, these situations are when the student is in the general education classroom, is learning the same content, so the same topic as his or her peers, but is learning material that is at his or her ability level. And this is a common myth, actually. There's a common myth amongst educators that if the student is not working to grade level, then they need to be in a special education classroom. The reality is, though, with inclusion, students work to their own ability level, and that's what the purpose of modifications do, is it helps students work to their own ability level. So they don't need to keep up in their class, they need to keep learning. So the 4 ways in which those modifications can be made is, first of all, altering the conceptual difficulty of the lesson. So this means to change the level of difficulty of the lesson, taking something that's a little bit more challenging and reducing it down to goals that are more appropriate for the student. This is just a very, very simple example that I want to share with you. Just an early elementary example where on the right here, you've got the class activity where the students are labeling the parts of the animal. Oh, I'm sorry, here on the left, I'm getting mixed up here. They are to label the parts of the dog, and they're to spell the parts of the dog independently. Here on the right-hand side is the modified version, and the student has the support of using a word bank below, and then as well as having the reduction of questions the student needs to answer. So this is a very simplified example of altering the conceptual difficulty. Here's another example. This is in the higher grade where students are learning about the ancient pyramids of Egypt. And the teacher has taken this text-heavy example, or this text-heavy reading excerpt, and the student on the modified program is, so what the students were asked to do in this situation is that they were asked to read this, and then they were to answer some comprehension questions about what they read. The student in this situation read the article with the paraprofessional, and then rather than writing out what they had learned, they created this web of items or concepts that they had learned about Egypt. The next way to modify curriculum is to alter the educational goals of the lesson. And this is a very common way of modifying math activities. So in this situation, you basically take the class activity, which in this, they are working on multiplication of 1-digit numbers. And the teacher who has looked at the student with the IEP has noticed that the student is learning single-digit numbers, learning how to write and identify single-digit numbers. And so what the teacher has done is taken the class assignment and altered the goals of this assignment to have the student look for single-digit numbers and then write out the single-digit numbers below on the line below. So the actual material itself is not changing, it's just what the goals of the material, that's what is changing. So you can see in this situation as well, here's an example of some 3-digit subtraction questions without regrouping. The teacher has supported the student on the IEP with their educational goals, which is to subtract single-digit numbers, and has simply crossed out the digits that are not needed. The third way to modify material is to alter the depth and breadth of content. Again, this is something that's often used in the higher grades, especially when you're getting into the sciences. So for example, this is when you change the rigor or the depth and the breadth of the content. So you might have a class that's learning about plant cells. However, that is the detail in those lessons might not be an educationally appropriate goal for a student. who has intellectual disabilities, for example. And so rather than having the student learn about plant cells, the teacher asks the student to actually grow plants from seeds and water them and take care of the plants, and can even measure growth. I mean, there's a whole bunch of activities that go from there. So this is an example of just taking the content and finding something in the content that the student can work with and can learn from. There's always an opportunity to find that. So it's not about what the student cannot do with the curriculum, it's about what they can do with the curriculum, which is important to keep in mind. And finally, the fourth way is to alter the instructional method of the lesson. And that is to change how the lesson is being delivered. And it is the teacher provides a better suited form of instruction. So for example, if the class is reading a novel, the teacher can ask the student to, for example, do a web, or to maybe make a PowerPoint presentation, or listen to the novel, a modified version of the novel, which can be found. There's a variety of sites that can be looked at for modified and adapted materials. The first one I can think of is, it's called the Sherlock Center. If you Google it, I don't have the exact address, it's very long, but if you Google Sherlock, as in Sherlock Holmes, and then center, it will take you to a bank of modified novels and literature that students of all ages can access. So this is another example of when the instructional method has been altered. The class here was learning about shapes, vertices, edges, and faces. And the student was also learning about shapes, but rather than completing a very text-heavy worksheet like this, the student was asked to bring in the shapes from home and share with the class and identify the different shapes. So this is an example of changing the instructional method. And finally, of course, students can not only be included in the math and reading and writing aspects of the curriculum, but of course, physical education, art, music. And here is an example of a student who is playing badminton with his classmates. So if you are looking for resources and you want to share those or this information with your school teacher or your school-based IEP team, here are a couple of resources you can direct them to. The first one on the left is called Modified Lessons. It's actually a live binder, so it's an online binder of modified lessons that have been created by other teachers and parents that are there for you to look at and just get ideas from. That's kind of the biggest, one of the biggest hurdles is just, finding a place to start. So you can refer to this website for some modified lessons. The second one is a book called Inclusion in Action. It's one I wrote a couple of years ago. It has over 40 different strategies for modifying schoolwork and in all different content areas from grades K to 12. And then finally, you can also go to my blog, which is The Inclusive Class at theinclusiveclass.com. And you'll find links to all of these resources that I've mentioned. You'll find more examples of ways to modify schoolwork, as well as information on inclusion, accommodations, and yeah, all kinds of different articles on including and having the school include your child and working with the school. So I want to thank you so much for listening today, and please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or you want to know more about modifications. And I will pass this on over to, is it Kendra? Are you next?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Nicole, that was such an awesome presentation. I will definitely be checking out your blog. So, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Kendra Hatchett. I beg your pardon. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Kendra Hatchett, and I'm going to be relatively brief, just giving a little bit of an overview of my experience as a general ed teacher, and primarily my experience as a parent of a child in special ed. Just really quick background. I had my child extremely prematurely, so I was introduced to special ed services when he was an infant. It began with early intervention in the regional center, early intervention Head Start, and we've been on our path ever since. As a teacher, although I teach general ed, I certainly have had a number of students with disabilities in my classroom being mainstreamed or involved in inclusion. And so I do have some of that experience as well. And I do apologize for the neighborhood noise here in my background. So my goal today is really just to be a support. As you can see, my virtual background says you're doing great. I just want to encourage all parents to just stay as positive as possible. This can be having a child receiving special ed services can be a daunting task when you're dealing with IEPs and some of the logistics. And I just want to encourage us just to stay supportive. So I'll just have a few slides and my presentation will conclude. The first thing, and I think one of the most important things, is our mindset. We want to make sure we keep a positive mindset, no matter how much fighting we may have to do to get things right or whatever the case may be. We want to be as positive as possible. One thing I want to share is there's a lot of progressive research out now where they call special ed exceptional needs. And so I like the term exceptional needs. I think it just takes away some of the stigma. I think I heard some people talking about earlier, some of the stigmatization. We want to think about it as positive as possible. I know for my child, I have heard him say, well, Mom, I have this issue. You know, I can't do my work. Well, Mom, I have this issue. I can't do this. And I have to tell him, you have that issue. That's a hurdle, but it doesn't mean you can't do it. You can do it. You're going to stay positive. And so we want to make sure that we're encouraging our children to know and to believe that they can do certain goals, realistic goals that we set out for them. And we want to encourage them to not feel like they can't because they're in special ed. I like to use people first language. So instead of saying, I have a special ed kid, I say, I have a child in special ed, or I have a child receiving special education services, or I have an exceptional needs child or a child with exceptional needs. It gives a different ring to it where the focus is on the child versus the diagnosis, the label, and what have you. Also, I want to strongly encourage all parents, families, caregivers, loved ones taking care of a child that's receiving special ed services. Have your support system. If you do not have one, create one. Be creative. I have had the baseball coach of my son come to me with in the IEP meetings as a support. I've had a godmother come, my sister. I've had a little bit of everybody in the community, the family, people who my son has had connections with, to come and attend the IEPs with me and help me with this process. I strongly encourage all parents to bring someone with you to the IEP meetings, whether it's via Zoom, in person, whatever the case may be. Have someone with you that is somewhat abreast of the situation of your child and their needs and strengths, so that they can provide that support, the emotional support for you to go through this process, and to give them the perspective to, at the end of the day, to help your child get his or her needs met. Lastly, I want to talk about communication is so critical. Sometimes there can be a little bit of a negative connotation between school and home. And it's really important, which I believe I've heard some of my fellow panelists say earlier, to get that relationship built. And that is so true. I agree with my fellow panelists. It's so important. And so I like to do what I call a preemptive strike before any IEP meetings, SSMT meetings, or any other kind of meeting of any kind. I like to send a little kudos. So any minor thing, oh, my child sure had a good day today, thank you. Send a message, an email, or whatever app they're using, message the teacher on the app. I like to reach out with some positive feedback before anything happens, because something unfortunately may come up later and then it's a negative conversation, and you don't want your first conversation with the teacher or anybody at the school to be negative. So, and not that we want to anticipate negativity, but in case it arises, we want to already have a positive relationship established, so that once an unfortunate situation arises, it can be approached with a different mindset if there's already a positive rapport established between the home and the school. And I also encourage you to be proactive on the apps. Know what the apps are and find out what is the best way that your teacher prefers, your child's teacher or teachers prefer communication. Some may prefer one app, another app. So know what that is, investigate what that is right away. And communicate with your child as well. So you're communicating with the school and you're communicating with your child about expectations and what their goals are and what you would have them to do and whatever their scenario is, because everybody's case is different. Let your child know what what your expectations are, and then know that you're going to hold them accountable. Whatever realistic accountability the role it may be for your child, you're going to hold them accountable. And when they have success, celebrate that success. And when maybe something didn't go right, you want to deal with that right away. So keep the communication open with everybody, with the child, with the school, and with the support system. And lastly, you are a team. The family, the child, the community resources, as we've seen so many community resources present, all the school employees. And not only are you a team, but you are the captain of your team. A lot of time, parents, and even myself, and I'm an educator, I've been working in education all of my life. As soon as I graduated from high school, I immediately became a paraeducator and worked in various aspects of education system. And I still get intimidated when I go into an IEP meeting or when there's an SSMT or a meeting to look at the 504 plan or all of these different meetings, informal parent conference, a formal parent conference. I mean, it can be intimidating, but at the end of the day, you're in charge. It's your child's education. And so don't go in there feeling like you're scared of the principal or whoever it is. You're in charge, and walk in there with your head held up high, knowing that these decisions have to take place with your approval, your consent. You guys have to be on the same page, and you are directing the ship. They are there to support you and your child. You know them best. And so use your voice and to know you have a part to play in this team. It's not just the school. You have a part, they have a part, you're together in this. So that's all for my presentation. Just stay encouraged, find your support system, and know that you can do this, and so can your child. Thank you, and that concludes my presentation. I'll turn it over to Ms. Kat.
Thank you, Kendra. That was awesome. I love your upbeat spirit. That's really wonderful to see. So I believe I'm the last person today. I just wanted to give a really brief overview. I have 2 children that have gone through this whole process and that are still in high school. And what's interesting about my case is a couple of things. Number one, that one of them is an example of what happens when you do it the right way. And one of them is an example of what happens when that doesn't quite work out. And so I think that contrast is really interesting to see, especially coming from someone like myself, where I have a medical background. I'm a very aggressive advocate for my children. I'm super friendly. I'm like all over the PTA. I'm definitely giving kudos to all the teachers and all this. And if I had this much trouble, I just, at least with the one kid, then I feel really, really bad for people that maybe have a language barrier or who are shy or who just both work and they can't deal with an IEP meeting or something like that. So I just wanted to share my story, and if anyone has any questions as a result of that, that is, oh my God, I have way too much stuff open. Let's see. How did you guys start your slide? I'm trying to play slideshow. That's what we want to do. Can you guys still see that? Hopefully. Okay. So these are my children. And one thing that you might notice right off the bat is that they're super cute and adorable. And of course, all parents say that. But in my case, this was actually, bring my shared window to the front. No, go back. So in my case, this was actually a negative. And not that people want to have ugly children or anything like that, but I think that because my kids were cute, they got away with a lot of stuff when they were very, very young. And everyone just sort of blew off what was going on for a long time. And that was not very helpful. So now I can't advance.
Oh, sorry to interrupt, Kat, but it looks like we're not seeing the slide that you're referring to.
I know let's try that again. Can you guys see that? Oh, it says now you can see my application. Fabulous.
Yeah.
So, quick brief there. So starting with my daughter, she is the polar opposite of my son. She's spunky, she's loud, she's vivacious. Both sets of parents growing up thought, oh, she's just like mom, because I guess I was a spunky little kid as well. And that again allowed my daughter to get away with a lot of pretty obscene behavior when she was a lot younger that probably we should have, come in a little bit earlier with. When I was pregnant with her brother, we sent her to a daycare center called the Bunny Patch, and she had a really hard time there. And her brother was born when she was 15 and a half months old. So that was some close spacing there. And I think that she was not only still a toddler, obviously, but she, from a developmental standpoint, was younger than that. And the daycare center really wanted her to act in a way that she wasn't capable of doing yet. So that became a real problem. So when I say that she did not have normal sibling jealousy, my daughter was actually trying to kill my son. She spent every waking minute trying to figure out ways to climb into his crib and smother him with pillows, or just, bash his head in with different toys, all sorts of things like that. So we were absolutely not allowed, and we couldn't allow the kids to be alone in a room for any amount of time, zero amount of time. And then at night, we had to have all sorts of monitors and stuff like that because she was super, super sneaky. And that's just a bummer. So when I reviewed her behavior with myself, I always thought there was something a little bit off, but other people didn't think so. With my younger son, my younger child, who's a son, he was very, very quiet and easygoing, just like his dad from the very beginning. Giant, I couldn't find a picture of his super huge blue eyes, but his thing was that he had medical problems right from the beginning. And I think that that was a lot easier for doctors and caregivers to identify with or to make sense of in their heads. So when he started missing milestones like rolling over or sitting up by himself or choking on his own food, that's something that you can point to that's a medical issue, and your pediatrician's like, nope, can't check that box. So he started getting a lot of services really really young. So as you will see, he's the poster child for what happens when you get really good early intervention. And then my daughter's sort of the opposite example of what happens when she kind of flew under the radar for a little bit too long. So both my kids are autistic. Alex, my son here, he did start to talk and then he lost his language and went absolutely silent. And like I said, they couldn't be left alone. And if you have a child that isn't making any noises, that's particularly dangerous for the younger child. So we evaluated the son with the regional center, and he was diagnosed with autism and global hypotonia, which is low muscle tone, which is part of the reason he couldn't roll over and sit up and stuff like that. And we were given amazing services: physical therapy, speech, occupational therapy for the choking, behavioral therapy, hours and hours and hours of behavioral therapy. So he was super compliant. He was just like the cute little kid. You couldn't get him to look at you, but he was very compliant in terms of just sitting there, and people really respond to that. On the contrary side to that, our daughter she really, really had terrible behavior, very maladaptive, very aggressive, not just with her brother, but with her family and with any adult really that we had to have work with her. And so we tried to have her assessed as well, but she was diagnosed with PDD, which is pervasive developmental disorder. She was very, very smart, was, approaching the ceiling on the tests. She's an amazing manipulator. And I think sometimes when you're very, very young, those tests are harder to interpret. So any parent who's on this that's ever received a PDD diagnosis knows that that's basically code for you're not going to get services, or they didn't know what was wrong with your kid, or they didn't know what to do. So that's sort of a catch-all diagnosis. So we initially tried to enroll the kids in a private preschool, but we got kicked out. We even paid out of our own pockets for a shadow. We literally had a grown-up with special needs training follow our daughter every minute of every day during preschool at our own cost, but she was still too disruptive. And then our son, he just didn't follow it at all. They would find him out in the yard. They didn't know how long he'd been there. He's just, completely not engaging with anything. So the regional center said that when he turned 3, he's the younger child, well, why don't you try to get him an IEP and see what you can do? And so we did that, and he immediately qualified under autistic like, and we got the daughter worked up at the same time, and she got an autistic like designation as well. And this is in Santa Monica, Malibu Unified School System. And I'm assuming it's a similar process in other places. So that was, I guess, a parent referral. And they were both put in a collaborative classroom for preschool, which is where half the kids are quote neurotypical, and the other half are sort of a high functioning autistic or something else where they do need support, but they're able to keep up with the academics as they are in preschool. So we were really excited because this meant that now both kids were getting what they needed, and they were both in the same classroom. But in elementary school, this is where things started to fall apart again. And I was very, very interested in hearing some of the descriptions from LACOE and also from the woman from the inclusion classroom, because I don't think we probably got what we needed. Our daughter was definitely left to swim by her own in general ed with absolutely no supports. And that was a really, really big mistake. And as we were given the choice of either a special education classroom or a general education classroom with no supports. And there's obviously levels in between that, that we would have been really happy to get, but we didn't. And so I don't know if you can see the second bullet here. She was written up about 11 times during the first 3 months of school for major behavioral infractions. So this is anything from stealing, this is biting, kicking, hitting, screaming, whatever, just all sorts of things. This is in kindergarten. And my third bullet point is that I think there's 2 different models for addressing special needs that may occur. And my school district, at least at the time, and they have gotten a lot better, so I do want to put that caveat out there, they definitely wanted to try to see if the kid could make it on their own, which I know they would explain that as being in the least inclusive or the least restrictive environment, excuse me. But I think that a lot more could have been done to really evaluate whether that was appropriate for that child. And I think in our case, if they had looked at it a little bit harder and had actually let us as parents participate in the process more, the financial issue wouldn't have even been one, because she would have been sort of, acclimated a lot earlier in her schooling. But we called an IEP because I knew I was allowed to do it. The school refused to do it. They didn't want to give her any sort of support. They didn't even want to give us her testing results before the meeting, which is just totally bogus for anyone who knows how that process works. And in fact, the principal ended up kicking me off of the grounds of the school, which was a first for me, because we were asking if we could please see the reports. So obviously that's not how anybody wants their IEP meeting to go. So we had to actually bring a lawyer with us the next time. And honestly, I don't think we would have gotten an aid if our daughter hadn't kicked the principal in the face, which I don't recommend. That's not the way we want to do this. But it was kind of sad how difficult it was to get her someone that could be with her in the general ed setting. She was testing out of the special education classroom, so she needed to be in the general ed, but just behaviorally and socially, she was not up to par. She went through about 3 aides before they could found one that she couldn't outmaneuver. I called her the British nanny. She was just sort of a lovely, but strict in that kind of British nanny kind of a way. And she totally turned her around, and she ended up being her one-on-one aide for the entirety of her elementary school career. And we're super thankful that we were able to work that out. But it was really, really difficult to get that done. But then on the other hand, with our son, we had a choice of a special autism classroom or general education for him. Again, that in between choice wasn't there, but since he was super compliant, we tried general ed, and it turned out to be fine. He definitely got left behind a little bit, but at that point I had ingratiated myself to all of the school staff. So I was all over campus and I was always looking out for him. And again, I feel really bad for families that can't do that, or they aren't allowed to. And I know with COVID now, I don't know if anyone could get into any schools anyway. So it just was really interesting to us that our very, very clearly autistic son was fine with no aid, but our daughter that didn't even have like a true diagnosis was not. And to us as a family, that really, it made us feel like the system wasn't working, because that didn't make any sense to us. Additionally, some hurdles that we had is that I know my husband's family didn't believe there was anything, quote, wrong with the kids. They thought we needed to be more strict, or that we were being, as I wrote here, conned by the liberal hippies in Santa Monica into paying someone to tell us that our kids weren't okay. You can imagine the joyous conversations I had with my in-laws. It was just miserable. And it was very difficult for my husband to disagree with his parents, because this has been the first time he'd ever really had kind of a major disagreement with them about anything. And I think that that's very hard for families where maybe one parent thinks there's something wrong, or even both parents, but none of the rest of the family, or even just if the school doesn't believe you that something's going on. That can be very discouraging and very disheartening. We did eventually get an autism diagnosis for our daughter. So she has Asperger's and a pretty awesome case of anxiety. And this was really helpful to my husband at the time, because he felt like, okay, now she has something we can point to on a piece of paper so we can really advocate for our kids. But again, it still wasn't strong enough to qualify for regional center, since they take what they call a category 1 diagnosis. So what we ended up doing was we had in-home behavior therapists, and they basically spent all of their time working on the kids interacting with each other. Even though they were really there for Alex under his file, we had to get them to work with Madeline as well, because it was just too, it had to be done in concert. So here's sort of some slides of them. And I think, again, cute or crazy, right? I think a lot of people look at them and they see, oh my God, they're so cute, they're fine. You know, whatever, mom, you're just overreacting. They're just kids. And I would just encourage any parents that are on the call or the webinar tonight, you know your kid, you know if something is going on or something's not. And we really had to push to get help for our daughter, and that's a bummer. But you know, if you are in any way concerned, you should really be talking to your teachers or the special ed staff at your school, or whoever is appropriate for your situation, because you can't just go off of, you know, some random person on the street who's like, oh, they're so cute, they're just kids. That's not necessarily, it's more anecdotal information. That's not exactly, you know, scientific. So wrapping this up, in contrast, today my daughter is a junior in high school and my son is a freshman. And like I said, they were admitted when she was 4 and he was 3. So they've been in the system a long time. And I do want to say that the high school they're at now is doing an excellent job with their IEPs. So if any of them are on the call, they can know that things have come a long way. And I don't know if that's because of the amount of time that's passed or better education for those people who run those programs or what, but good work, however that happened. So my son remains, you know, a very delightful and accomplished student. He's adored by all of his teachers. He advocates for himself. He has absolutely no trace of speech issues. He makes full contact with you. I mean, they have him in a social skills group just because he prefers to be alone more than with other kids. But honestly, it's probably just so he can keep his IEP. he is absolutely the poster child for when you get the right kind of supports early on and you don't have to, kill your parents with fighting about getting support. My daughter, however, still struggles. She is extremely sensitive. She can be difficult to be around. Her anxiety and her acute hearing makes it really hard for her to be at school or to be in the lunchroom with people chewing, things like that. And with her, it's very easy to mistake her social issues with her having an attitude. And I think that that is one of the biggest problems is when they're young, oh, they're so cute. And then when they're old, oh, that's just a teenage attitude problem. Well, not always, because I don't think that everyone's teenagers are, miserable to be around 100% of the time. I don't think that that's the baseline that we're looking for. So I think a lot of her teachers and staff sometimes, they assume that her apparent non-interest in school is a lack of motivation, but it's actually really poor self-esteem. And sometimes she's shutting down because it's too loud and things like that. So ever since she was in middle school and high school, they did take the aid away because they thought it would be socially maladaptive, I guess is one way of saying it. Which makes sense, but it has been very difficult for her that there hasn't been a whole lot of in between. So in conclusion, I do really feel that if my daughter's issues had been addressed younger, that we would have had an easier road. But I'm super grateful that there is special education and that these are things that we can work with here. So this is my last slide, and this is our second to last slide. So these are the things that I struggled with as a parent of two. Not being able to get our daughter diagnosed earlier, as I've mentioned several times. The stigma of having a non-neurotypical child, actually two. So we were not the people that people asked for play dates. That was not our family. Even if I was best friends with all the mothers, they knew that our kids were hard, so we just weren't getting those offers, and that's just a bummer. Having people not believe that something was wrong. Oh, they're so cute. What are you talking about? Or, that's just a surly teenager, that kind of thing. And then I found the IEP process to be very opaque and confusing at first. And the school officials, at least at the beginning, were not very understanding at all. And were, at least based on what I'm hearing today, just telling us blatantly incorrect information. So I'm thrilled that the way it's supposed to be is better than the way I had it. And I hope that, I know there's a big lack of funding for special education. I hope that's something that we can continue to advocate for as PTA and just community organizations and just, parents in general, because there's nothing worse than having, them tell you, and I've been told to my face that we can't help you because we don't have the money. And that's just like, it's crushing because that they know they could be doing something else and they just don't have that option. So anyways, I think I probably went over my 5 to 6 minutes, but that is my story, which is kind of all over the place. So thanks for listening.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kat, and thank you to all of our panelists. You guys have truly taken us through a journey and given us a lot of expertise and experiences that we can reflect upon. I know that we have gone a little bit over our 8 o'clock mark, but I know that we do have some time. Do have some questions that have been submitted through the Q&A, and then some questions that were submitted through registration as well. So for those who maybe want to go ahead and go to sleep, if you need to log off, feel free to do so participants wise. But if panelists, if you're okay with staying on just a little bit longer to answer some questions, we'll try to see how many we can get to. And also we will be able to have these questions available to the panelists to answer at a later time as well. So Sonny, did you want to start with maybe 1 or 2 questions?
Certainly, yes. These were the questions that were submitted via the Zoom registration. So I'll start with, and I'm not sure which panelist to address this to, so hopefully the correct one will jump in and save me. The question is, does the Board of Education need to review a parent's request for an IEP or a 504 assessment? And is it different if there's a doctor letter of conditions or needs?
So I'll jump in and start, and Chris, you can chime in too. If a request is being made for an IEP, okay, the request is made to the special education office. I need to assume that's what they mean by the Board of Education, okay, is the district office. So the request gets submitted to the district office. It can even be at the school site that then it moves up the chain based upon the information submitted with the request. So with the doctor's note, then the district can decide, and there are set timelines, the 15-day timeline to respond if there's enough to either do an assessment for the child, or maybe call, people to the table, look at it through the lens of an SST process to then see if maybe even a 504. So, but it isn't unheard of for the district, because that's where you want to send your request. I don't know, Chris, if you have anything you want to chime in on that.
I think that was pretty concise. I would just encourage you in writing to reach out to your special education department, put in writing your concerns, make sure that you have it dated, you have a copy for yourself, and reach back out to them if you don't get a timely, and I mean timely, within 15-day response.
Can one of you explain, I see a couple of chats, people might not understand the difference between an IEP and a 504.
Yeah, that was actually a question in one of the two places that was asked. So a 504 falls under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And basically, let's say you're going through an evaluation process because there was enough documentation sent that they felt that doing an assessment for an IEP done by a district school psychologist, they do their assessments, and based on the findings, they don't necessarily meet the criteria for an IEP, but there is criteria that they have a need for a 504 plan. And a 504 plan is accommodations and modifications that are provided, within the general education setting. So they don't have, like on an IEP document, a disability checked off, but they have a disability in need of that 504 and supports within the general education classroom. Chris or anyone else want to tackle on to that?
Sounds good, Marcie.
Did that help, Kat? Okay.
Okay, so it looks like we have another question. It was submitted anonymously. Are ninth graders typically or rarely in attendance at their IEP meetings? And then there's a second question: is the student's counselor in attendance at the IEP meeting?
So in my journey, and I think, Chris, you would concur, and having the time of having kids in IEPs, especially when we start talking high school, and I'm going to feed off a little bit on a tangent of transition services, okay? I always like to start including our students in IEPs, definitely by middle school, because they need to understand that, yes, they have a disability. They need to understand the different accommodations that they're given, because those could end up being lifelong for them, right? And it also helps them to begin learning the advocacy skills necessary to be adults like all of us, and how we advocate for needs for any of us. Like Daryl said, there's no normal, right? And so I highly encourage starting, middle school. It's really a parent choice, but IDEA does state that by the child's right before their 16th birthday, the child needs to be in attendance, because that is when the transition plan comes forward. And that is everything that your child has said they have an interest in, or what they may want to do, or where they may, want to go. So the sooner you can get them in and start that process to teach them, the better. When I was in a district setting, my students, I taught secondary, all of my high school kids attended their meetings. Parents were fine with it. And they actually, by their senior year, they ran their last IEP meeting because I really worked to prep them for that. So anyway, I hope that helped. Chris, anyone else want to chime in? Nicole, maybe even you on your end, if you had any.
So I
Okay.
believe there was a part two to that question. Are the counselors present at the
Oh,
IEP meetings?
Yeah, so thank you for that. I'm sorry, I got sidetracked with what I was saying. Traditionally at the high school level, yes, because you want that counselor in there to be doing credit checks every year to make sure that the child is still on track towards high school graduation. Because if they're failing any classes, that's a perfect opportunity for the parent, not that they shouldn't know prior to that, but to see what it looks like on the matrix spreadsheet of classes required to take. And then that's also the opportunity for the team to sit around and discuss, how can the child make up that class? When is it going to be appropriate? Is it during summer session? Is it another maybe online class, during the week? How can that class be made up if they did? But it is a good time. Also under IDEA, regarding the transition plan, that's a component, the credit check and all of that, and the classes needed for graduation that have to be in that IEP. So yes, you want your counselor there to speak to it because that is their area of expertise that you want at the meeting.
Great, thank you for that. There were several questions submitted in advance that all kind of ask the same thing, and that is, how can parents make sure that IEPs are being followed, and what should they do if they're not?
Great question. I have actually worked with a lot of parents that have felt the same. And the first thing I would share is you need to have your documentation, right? Have your data that really, if you believe that IEP is not being followed, have your data to support that, or what makes you believe that. And start talking with those teachers. Chris and I shared that communication is key. And I think oftentimes there ends up being a breakdown when we don't communicate. And, by having that open communication, you can really ask, how is your child doing? You might be seeing something at home that me as their teacher might see something different, right? They might perform something for me that they don't for you as the parent, or they perform something for you as the parent that they don't for me. So really having and keeping that data and open communication to me is key to see if that's legitimate, right? That they're not making progress, it's not being met. Then, you come to an IEP meeting, let's say it isn't, and let's just say the teacher was unaware or whatever the case may be. Again, I can't speak to anyone specific, so I'm trying to be general, okay? So let's say it was decided that it isn't. Come back to the IEP team, meet again. That IEP is always a working document. Just because you've signed and it's set in stone does not mean you cannot call a meeting in 2 weeks if you think something isn't working. You absolutely can, and that is your right to. And it's the right of the district to hold that meeting based on your request within a 30-day timeline. So absolutely get in there, start meeting, because you know what? Life happens, right? Where we get really busy, and I'm not trying to make an excuse for any team member, but sometimes that parent slowing us down is an amazing gift that you give to the educators. And, they can see it and then, okay, yes, let's fix it. Or they knew about it, but they got so busy, they didn't have that second to slow down to call a meeting, and you caught it. And they're really grateful for that. So I'm a believer in open communication and call a meeting, get it straightened out ASAP. Because you don't want the child to suffer, because at the end of the day, through all of that, it has to be about your student first, your child first.
Okay, let's see. We have another question, and that This is very LACOE heavy. We have a lot of questions being directed towards LACOE. How does the Los Angeles County Office of Special Education interact with local school districts?
So our specific unit provides support to all 80 school districts in the entire Los Angeles County. Okay, so all the way up from Palmdale, all the way down. And it's based upon whatever supports or needs that the special education district offices feel they need support or help with. So it would be the district office reaching out to us to let us know, you know, this is what I need support in, or training in, or any of the above. And then based on that request from the district, then Chris or myself then work to provide that support in that area for them.
Thank you. We also have a few questions just regarding financial constraints, and if parents have any recourse if certain options aren't being offered to their student based on financial constraints that are coming up. Is there any option that the parent has then?
Are you speaking in terms, and maybe we don't know, of a service being provided or a device being provided? Or, I mean, I could answer based with that assumption.
The exact question was what to do when a school district is not offering certain options due to financial concerns, such as not providing an aid or that type of thing.
Sure. So again, not knowing the specific district, but if it, you know, what you would need to do is find out, what I would recommend is what is a policy. So if it is for an aid, you know, find out what the policy would be for their child to get, you know, access to a one-on-one aid. Most districts I have interfaced with tend to have a policy of what that looks like, because having a one-on-one is seen as the most restrictive type setting you could have, right, for your child. And so a lot of times you want to look at the need for that one-on-one as a high need, like we heard from Kat. You know, there was a lot of need that generated that to happen. And so we want to make sure that really is it, because there is also a side that can be very stigmatizing for a child in having that one-on-one, and no district would ever want that for an individual. Mm-hmm. So I would say start first with your district to see what their policy is, or if there's any kind of assessments they could do to track what that would look like for the need, you know, to be eligible. Kat, I see you unmuted. So I was going to say, Kat, why don't you chime in? Because you've lived that road. So maybe you have some other advice.
Well, that was actually my question. I'm not going to lie. I fed that to Sandy.
Okay.
But I mean, maybe this is just my school district, but I guess I understand that aids are considered to be the most restrictive, but in elementary school in particular, it is my personal opinion that I would rather go heavy on the early end, and then once the child is acclimated or, you know, learns the social skills they need to learn in the younger grades, where honestly they have extra teachers in the classrooms all the time. So it's not, it was not very stigmatizing at all, at least for my daughter, once they figured it out. Right. But I did have people saying to me, like, we're not even gonna consider it because of finances. And that's just, and when I was listening to, I think Nicole from the inclusion class, I mean, wow, what great ideas, but who's going to pay for that? Like, I don't understand like how this would actually be implemented. So maybe that's a question for Nicole, because I know right now the teachers are like COVID, and they're, you know, everyone's so stressed out about everything. But even before that, I would have loved to have seen that, but I had, you know, where they're inviting the children to come in and maybe be studying it in a slightly modified way, or, you know, whatever. But I certainly didn't see a whole lot of that in my school district. Maybe I just didn't see it. So it seems like the finances unfortunately get in the way of our best intentions sometimes. And that's just a bummer. I guess there's nothing, I don't know what we can really do about that.
Okay,
Just to
well,
respond to your, just to quickly respond to your comment about extra time and pay, because somebody had asked that in the Q&A section, but it's, the teachers do not get extra pay for doing this. There's no incentive. It's their job to educate all the students in their classroom. What they do need, however, is support and training and resources. So if you as a parent can collect some of that information, resources, examples, you know, just give them the information to get started, then that can definitely kind of get the ball rolling. There's also a lot of videos online, all sorts of free resources to help teachers begin to plan. I mean, they're already planning for a wide variety of needs in their classroom anyway. Not a fifth grade class isn't a straight up fifth grade class. There's all kinds of abilities in there. So this is just taking it one extra step, and doesn't require a lot of extra time. It's just an intentional effort to include the child to the best of their ability.
fantastic. Well, it looks like we have gone way past our time that we have allotted, but this is a very important subject. And I know that we had a lot of questions, and we did receive a lot of really good information and resources today. So we'll have to conclude. I know that we have more questions that we haven't gotten to yet, but we will be sure to make sure the panelists have a chance to answer those questions and get those answers back to you. So we've come to the end of our evening. So please capture the information on this slide to access more information about Joni and Friends, the inclusive class, and the Los Angeles County Office of Education's Department of Specialized Services. We will be providing a link to a Google Drive with additional resources in the chat, I believe. So you'll have more resources available to you. So we hope that you've learned some valuable information. And if there are any additional questions, which we know that there are, or any ideas for topics that you would like to see in our speaker series, you can feel free to email the speaker series committee members with the information that is provided here. One of our goals of the 33rd District PTA is to increase our avenues of communication with our members. And we have a variety of social media accounts, including Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So please feel free to follow us on there as well. And finally, I would like to invite you to join us at our next social media and online safety forum, which is next month on Tuesday, November 17th at 7 p.m. And I thank you once again for joining us, and have a wonderful night, everybody. Bye-bye for now.